The desert air shivers under the morning sun. Sand bites at exposed skin and the distant hills vibrate with a low metallic hum. Then it comes. A staccato roar, mechanical and unyielding. Bullets tear through the air, striking the earth with a thunderous impact. Men dive into whatever cover they can find. Rocks, shallow trenches, even the bare sand. A young soldier presses his face to the ground, heart hammering. Around him comrades fall, some screaming, others silent. Smoke curls into the sky, mixing with the acrid smell of cordite and burnt metal. The sound of the weapon is relentless, a rhythm that seems to mock every human heartbeat. Somewhere on the ridge, a single gunner pulls the trigger again and again. One machine, one operator, and the battlefield is transformed. Entire lines of men vanish beneath a storm of lead. Courage, numbers, and strategy. Nothing can pierce this new wall of fire. By the end of this day, the rules of war will be rewritten forever. What is it about a weapon? A simple collection of steel and mechanics that can reshape entire battlefields. How could a device designed to multiply human force topple empires and leave landscapes littered with the dead? By the late 19th century, wars were still fought with muskets, cannons, and cavalry. Bravery and numbers decided outcomes, but the machine gun changed everything. Suddenly, a handful of men could hold a hill against thousands. A single position could cut down advancing armies before they reached the trenches. The rules of engagement, once predictable, became chaos incarnate. Inventors in smoky workshops tinkered with mechanisms that harnessed recoil, cooling, and ammunition belts. Commanders on distant battlefields grappled with tactics that no longer worked. Soldiers felt an invisible force striking from afar, their courage tested against relentless, unfeeling fire. The machine gun did more than kill. It forced armies to rethink strategy, societies to reconsider the cost of war, and humanity itself to confront the scale of mechanized destruction. It blurred the line between technology and terror, innovation and horror. This is the story of that transformation. The men who created it, the soldiers who faced it, and the nations that adapted or failed. It is a tale of ingenuity, courage, and catastrophe. A device that did not just change battles, but changed war itself. By the time its power was fully understood, no soldier, general, or nation could ignore it. The world of warfare would never be the same. The mid-19th century was a world in motion. Industrial machines roared to life in factories. Railways stitched continents together, and steamships cut across oceans with mechanical precision. Societies were reshaped by iron, coal, and steel. Armies grew larger, but their tactics lagged behind the pace of innovation. Soldiers still marched in rigid formations, muskets held at the ready, swords gleaming in the sun. Battles were spectacles of courage and numbers, but the world was about to be transformed. The American Civil War offered the first glimpse of the future. In 1862, a crude Gatling gun tore through lines of infantry. Men could not fathom the speed, the relentless volley of bullets. Entire regiments faltered before a single operator. These early experiments hinted at a terrifying possibility. One man armed with a machine could change the course of battle. Europe watched closely. Colonial wars in Africa and Asia provided further evidence. In South Africa, the British used rapid-fire weapons to dominate local forces. The French in Algeria and the Germans in East Africa learned the same lesson. The combination of technology and terrain could turn small units into decisive forces. The balance of power was no longer dictated solely by numbers or bravery. It was increasingly dictated by firepower, precision, and mechanical reliability. Yet military thinkers struggled to adapt. Generals steeped in Napoleonic traditions could not envision a battlefield dominated by machines. Linear formations, cavalry charges, and massed infantry volleys, tactics that had won empires, were suddenly vulnerable. Battles became unpredictable, chaotic, and merciless. Commanders who clung to tradition found themselves facing annihilation, their once trusted strategies shattered by the whine and hammer of automatic fire. By the dawn of the 20th century, Europe was a continent teetering on the edge. Alliances stretched across borders, Empires bristled with ambition and armies prepared for conflict, armed with rifles and artillery, but none fully grasped the potential of the machine gun. Its emergence promised not just more efficient killing, but a revolution in the very nature of combat. The political landscape amplified its impact. Nations sought supremacy not only through armies but through industrial capacity. Factories and workshops became as crucial as barracks. Weapons development raced forward, driven by the twin forces of competition and fear. Hiram Maxim in Britain, an American expatriate, experimented with mechanisms that used recoil to feed ammunition, creating a weapon that could fire hundreds of rounds per minute. Others followed, refining design, cooling systems, and mobility. The groundwork for a new era of warfare was being laid, one in which technology dictated the fate of men on the battlefield. The cultural dimension mattered too. Soldiers were trained to valorize courage and endurance. Civilians still romanticized war as a stage for heroism and honor, yet the machine gun would strip away these illusions. It would make heroism costly, courage deadly, and endurance a matter of luck. The clash between human expectation and mechanized reality would define the wars to come. And so, as the world marched toward global conflict, the stage was set. The machine gun existed, perfected in workshops and trials awaiting its baptism on the battlefield. Europe's empires, confident in their doctrines and manpower, could not imagine how swiftly and decisively this invention would rewrite the rules. The next war would not just be fought with men, but with machines that multiplied their power and magnified their terror. By the time it roared to life in anger, the consequences would be irreversible. Entire strategies, nations, and lives would bend or break under the weight of its relentless fire. The story of the machine gun is inseparable from the men who imagined it, built it, and faced it. Hiram Maxim, an American working in London, stands at the center of this revolution. Brilliant and determined, he saw the potential of harnessing recoil to create sustained automatic fire. In 1884, he demonstrated his invention to skeptical military observers. The gun could fire hundreds of rounds per minute, far beyond the capability of human hands. For Maxim, it was not merely a weapon. It was proof that engineering could redefine warfare itself. Across Europe, other minds contributed to its rise. In Germany, designers refined early automatic weapons, producing models that emphasized reliability and defensive integration. In Belgium, the Vickers Company took Maxim's design and turned it into a symbol of industrial and military power. America, too, had voices in this chorus. John Moses Browning would later create weapons that would dominate the 20th century battlefield, marrying precision with relentless fire. Commanders confronted the machine gun with a mixture of fascination and fear. German officers experimented with defensive strategies, learning that a single gun placed at the right angle could hold an entire ridge. British generals struggled to integrate it with infantry tactics, often discovering the hard way that traditional formations were suicidal in the face of concentrated automatic fire. French and Russian commanders wrestled with the implications, attempting to combine artillery and cavalry with varying and often tragic success. Then there were the soldiers, whose lives were directly shaped by this machine. Private William Owens fought in the Boer War, writing of the buzzing swarm of death that seemed to come from nowhere. He described comrades falling like wheat under a scythe, the air thick with smoke and fear. Letters from World War I paint similar pictures. Trenches rattled by the relentless staccato of bullets. Men learning quickly that courage alone could not save them. Civilians, too, became unwitting witnesses. Journalists, war correspondents, and hospital nurses recounted the horror of towns turned into killing grounds. One nurse in Flanders wrote of corridors filled with blood and mud, the cries of wounded soldiers mingling with the mechanical roar outside. Even far from the front lines, societies grappled with the psychological weight of this new instrument of death. What united these figures, inventors, commanders, soldiers, was a confrontation with the same truth. The machine gun was not just a tool, but a force that demanded adaptation. Maxim saw its potential, soldiers feared it, and generals struggled to understand it. Together, their experiences shaped the battlefield, forcing every participant to reconcile with a weapon that was as much a test of human ingenuity as it was of endurance and courage. By the opening years of the 20th century, these men had laid the groundwork for the first truly modern battlefield. Their stories, their mistakes, and their innovations would collide in ways that none of them could fully anticipate, leaving an indelible mark on history and rewriting the rules of war forever. The machine gun was deceptively simple in principle, yet devastating in effect. Hiram Maxim's invention relied on recoil to feed ammunition automatically, a breakthrough that eliminated the need for manual cranking. With a single operator, the gun could fire hundreds of rounds per minute, a rate of fire unimaginable with traditional rifles. Water-cooled barrels allowed sustained volleys, keeping the weapon from overheating even under the fiercest engagements. Other designs soon followed. The Vickers gun, refined in Britain, became the standard of reliability, its barrels capable of mowing down advancing lines for hours on end. In Germany, the MG08 mirrored Maxim's principles but emphasized ruggedness and defensive integration. Across continents, inventors sought to balance firepower, mobility, and durability, each improvement making the weapon deadlier and more flexible. The gun's lethality lay not only in its mechanics but in its placement and human use. A single machine gun nest, dug into earthworks or hidden behind rubble, could dominate a valley, a road, or a ridge. Infantry advancing in open ground could be destroyed before even closing with enemy lines. Soldiers came to fear not the enemy's numbers, but the invisible reach of mechanical fire, arriving without pause, judgment, or mercy. Training became as critical as the weapon itself. Infantry had to understand fields of fire, interlocking arcs, and coordination with artillery. A gun mispositioned could leave gaps, but a well-placed machine gun could make entire battalions vanish beneath a storm of lead. Commanders who grasped this transformed their defenses. Those who did not paid the price in lives. For the average soldier, the machine gun was almost supernatural. Letters from the front describe it as a buzzing monster, a force that seemed to anticipate movement, striking with unerring precision. The psychological weight was immense. Men learned to crawl, to hug the ground, to move only under cover of smoke or night. Survival depended less on courage and more on timing, positioning, and sheer luck. In battle, the gun's presence was unmistakable. The first volley sent a metallic hiss through the air, punctuated by the thud of rounds hitting earth and wood. Smoke and heat rose from the barrel, marking the location of death. Engineers and gunners learned to synchronize belts of ammunition, coordinate with spotters, and maintain barrels under continuous fire. Each operator became a conductor of destruction, turning mechanical rhythm into orchestrated slaughter. The machine gun also forced tactical innovation. Cavalry charges, once decisive, became suicidal. Infantry columns required suppression, creeping barrages, and careful reconnaissance. The weapon reshaped both attack and defense, dictating the pace and nature of modern combat. Its influence extended far beyond the battlefield, forcing armies to rethink logistics, training, and strategy. The terror it inspired was matched only by the awe it commanded. It was a machine of brilliant engineering, capable of multiplying human power in ways previously unimaginable. Yet that brilliance carried a grim cost. It transformed the experience of warfare into something relentless, impersonal, and horrifying. For every advance, for every charge, there was the ever-present staccato, the endless barrage that reminded men of the machine's absolute authority over life and death. By the outbreak of World War I, the machine gun was not just a weapon, it was a statement. A single gun, properly positioned and manned, could hold entire armies at bay. Its mechanics were simple, yet its consequences were profound. The battlefield had changed, and those who did not understand it would face unimaginable losses. Armies across the world faced a brutal truth. The machine gun demanded a complete rethink of battlefield doctrine. Traditional strategies honed over centuries suddenly became suicide. Linear formations, massed infantry advances, and cavalry charges, all the tactics that had won empires, crumbled under the relentless fire of automatic weapons. In Germany, commanders grasped the potential early. They developed defense in depth, embedding machine guns in concrete bunkers behind barbed wire and in carefully prepared trenches. Overlapping fields of fire ensured that no soldier could advance without exposure to lethal fire from multiple angles. Drill and precision became as important as bravery. A single misstep could be fatal, and generals understood that coordination was now the difference between victory and annihilation. The British Army approached the problem differently. They experimented with mobile units, attempting to integrate machine guns into infantry maneuvers rather than fixed defenses. Crews were trained to operate on the move, to provide covering fire for advancing troops and to coordinate with artillery bombardments. The learning curve was steep and early engagements exposed glaring weaknesses. Many officers were forced to rewrite manuals mid-conflict, while young soldiers discovered that courage alone could not counter mechanized fire. The French, meanwhile, struggled to balance tradition with innovation. Cavalry units, once symbols of battlefield glory, became almost obsolete. Infantry formations were revised, artillery support became essential, and the concept of coordinated suppressive fire emerged. Still, mistakes were frequent. Entire battalions were lost because commanders underestimated the placement or concentration of machine guns. Training became a central focus. Soldiers were drilled not only in weapon operation but in situational awareness, how to identify enemy nests, anticipate angles of fire, and move under constant threat. Officers emphasized reconnaissance, terrain analysis, and inter-unit communication. For the first time, battlefield survival depended on intellectual discipline as much as physical courage. At the front, soldiers quickly learned that the machine gun was merciless but predictable. It had patterns, angles, and limitations, but those limitations were deadly only if misjudged. Personal accounts describe crawling for hours across open ground, timing every movement to the pauses of the weapon, and relying on smoke, debris, or sheer luck to avoid annihilation. Commanders who mastered these patterns could direct entire attacks or defenses with precision. Those who failed turned the battlefield into a graveyard. The contrast between armies that adapted and those that clung to old tactics was stark. Early battles of World War I revealed catastrophic losses among forces unprepared for modern firepower. Units that relied solely on courage and mass were decimated. Those that understood doctrine, coordination, and suppression survived and sometimes won. The machine gun was more than a weapon. It was a teacher, forcing armies to evolve or perish. It demanded careful preparation, methodical tactics, and a ruthless understanding of terrain and timing. Every training exercise, every tactical revision, carried the weight of thousands of lives. By the time the guns roared across the fields of Europe in 1914, it was clear that warfare had entered a new age. Victory no longer belonged solely to the brave or the numerous. It belonged to those who understood the relentless, unforgiving logic of mechanized fire. The battlefield had become a classroom, and the lesson was absolute: adapt or die. The first time the machine gun proved its deadly potential on a large scale was at the Battle of Omdurman in 1898. British forces, advancing across open desert, faced an army of thousands of Sudanese warriors. The sun beat down on the parched earth as men pressed forward, swords and spears glinting. Then the guns opened fire. The Maxim guns, water-cooled and mounted on tripods, unleashed a torrent of bullets that cut through the charging lines with mechanical precision. What had once been valor and momentum was shredded in seconds. Soldiers fell in waves, the air thick with smoke, dust, and screams. One observer wrote that it was like a river of men swept aside by an invisible scythe. The battlefield itself seemed to recoil under the relentless staccato of fire. The Russo-Japanese, War of 1904-1905 offered another glimpse of the machine gun's influence, this time in entrenched positions. The siege of Port Arthur demonstrated that a few well-placed guns could dominate entire fortifications. Infantry assaults became slow, methodical, and extraordinarily costly. Both sides learned that entrenched machine guns could halt attacks before they even began, forcing armies to rethink offensive strategies. By the time World War I erupted in 1914, Europe was primed for a catastrophe. In Belgium and northern France, the first clashes exposed unprepared armies to an entirely new reality. Cavalry units charged over open ground, only to be cut down within moments. Infantry lines, once the backbone of military power, became vulnerable targets. Letters from soldiers described the buzzing wall of death, bullets tearing through earth, wood, and flesh with terrifying regularity. The psychological effect was immediate. Soldiers learned to fear not just the enemy, but the invisible reach of a single gun. Retreats were executed cautiously. Advances were measured in inches. Commanders were forced to revise orders mid-battle, as old strategies failed in the face of automated firepower. Even experienced officers, accustomed to maneuvering thousands of men across the field, found themselves stunned by the gun's efficiency and destructiveness. The machine gun did not merely defend, it dictated the pace of battle. A single weapon could control a valley, a hill, or a bridge, halting entire campaigns with terrifying ease. The era of heroic charges, of bold frontal assaults, had come to an abrupt end. Courage alone could no longer overcome firepower. Only strategy, coordination, and adaptability offered a chance of survival. Stories from the front lines convey the mixture of awe and horror. Private Thomas Hall, stationed near Mons, wrote home about a noise that filled the air like thunder and a heat that could melt courage itself. Comrades vanished under the unceasing hail, while officers scrambled to maintain order amidst chaos. It was a lesson learned at a devastating cost. The machine gun had arrived, and the battlefield would never be the same. These opening engagements revealed a hard truth. Technology had overtaken tradition. Entire armies were being forced into a brutal school of adaptation, learning that survival now depended on understanding a weapon that moved faster than human thought and fired without hesitation. The first field uses were not just tactical demonstrations, they were warnings. By the end of these early clashes, one fact was undeniable. The machine gun had claimed its place as the arbiter of modern warfare. And yet, even as generals adjusted and soldiers adapted, no one could fully anticipate how profoundly it would reshape strategy, tactics, and human experience in the years to come. The Somme, Verdun, and Ypres, names that would come to symbolize the horror of World War I, also marked the turning points in understanding the machine gun's power. At the Somme in 1916, British forces prepared for what was meant to be a decisive offensive. Thousands of men lined the trenches, bayonets fixed, hearts pounding. Then the German guns erupted. The relentless staccato tore through the advancing waves. Entire battalions vanished before they could reach enemy lines. Officers' shouts were swallowed by the hail of bullets. Trenches became tombs and the ground between them a charnel field. Soldiers' letters speak of a buzzing death that hovered over no man's land, invisible yet absolute. It was clear. Traditional charges were obsolete. Verdun in 1916 offered a grim mirror. German machine guns, entrenched and expertly sighted, repelled repeated French attacks. The battle stretched for months, not days, as the relentless mechanical fire turned even the most well-coordinated assaults into grinding attrition. Soldiers endured endless volleys, their courage tested to the limits of human endurance. Those who survived carried memories of a sound that haunted dreams, the constant, merciless chatter of automatic fire. Ypres saw the same lesson reinforced. Here the interlocking machine gun positions and barbed wire created killing zones. The offensive advantage had vanished. Defense dominated. The tide of war now depended less on numbers and more on tactics, engineering, and careful coordination. Commanders had to learn to move their troops under cover, coordinate creeping artillery barrages, and integrate machine gun suppression into their attacks. Every mistake, every miscalculation, cost hundreds of lives. Stories of individual soldiers bring this reality into sharp focus. Lance Corporal John Parr, one of the first British soldiers killed in World War I, fell to a machine gun near Mons in 1914. His death, like countless others, was instantaneous, a brutal introduction to the scale of modern firepower. Private William Allen, caught in the mud at Passchendaele, described crawling for hours under invisible fire, bullets whipping overhead, comrades disappearing beside him. The human scale of mechanized firepower was terrifying, reshaping the experience of combat for every soldier. The battles also forced innovation. Commanders experimented with infiltration tactics, stormtrooper units, and coordinated barrages to bypass or suppress entrenched guns. Armies adapted, but at a staggering cost. Entire generations of young men learned that survival required more than courage. It demanded cunning, patience, and an intimate understanding of mechanical death. Beyond tactics, these turning points highlighted a stark truth. The machine gun was more than a weapon. It was a force that shaped strategy. Entire campaigns were planned around its presence. Offensive momentum slowed. Defensive positions became nearly impregnable. Traditional notions of battlefield heroism collided with the cold, impersonal efficiency of mechanized fire. By the close of these early campaigns, it was undeniable. The machine gun dictated the pace and character of modern war. It forced armies to reconsider how battles were fought, how soldiers were trained, and how nations deployed their industrial might. Those who underestimated it suffered devastating losses. Those who understood it gained a fleeting advantage. And yet, even in the midst of adaptation and innovation, one haunting fact remained. No one could fully anticipate the cumulative toll. Entire fields, towns, and armies would be reshaped, their fates sealed by the unceasing, inexorable roar of automatic fire. The machine gun had claimed its place as the defining instrument of modern warfare. The machine gun was not only a weapon, it was an industrial challenge on a scale never seen before. Factories roared to life, producing thousands of these lethal mechanisms, each requiring precision engineering, quality materials, and constant maintenance. In Britain, the Vickers factories churned out guns with relentless efficiency, turning workshops into instruments of war as formidable as the weapons themselves. In Germany, Spandau and other arsenals pushed production to match doctrine, ensuring that every defensive line could be reinforced with a nest of automatic fire. The contrast between nations was striking. Germany, with its centralized and disciplined industrial system, could produce large numbers of reliable machine guns, placing them strategically to dominate defensive positions. Britain relied on colonial resources and international supply chains, which made logistics complex, but ultimately allowed the empire to maintain a steady flow of arms. France, struggling with internal industrial limitations, often found itself racing to equip units with the guns that had already rewritten the rules of the battlefield. Production was only half the battle. Ammunition supply, maintenance, and trained operators were critical. A gun without bullets was useless. A poorly maintained gun could jam or overheat, turning lethal potential into dangerous failure. Armies established depots, workshops, and repair units just to keep the guns firing. Entire campaigns depended on these logistical networks, and failures in production or supply could change the outcome of battles in an instant. The industrial capacity of nations shaped the war itself. Germany's ability to mass-produce weapons early gave it defensive advantages on the Western Front, while Britain and France had to innovate quickly to keep up. The scale of production transformed war from a contest of men and courage into a contest of machines, factories, and engineers. Victory became as dependent on assembly lines as on strategy. Factories also became laboratories for innovation. Engineers improved barrels, cooling systems, and mobility. The Maxim's recoil mechanism inspired new designs. Water-cooled barrels gave way to lighter air-cooled versions for mobile operations. The lessons of production fed directly into tactical doctrine. A gun that could fire continuously without overheating allowed defenders to hold positions for days, while mobile designs enabled infantry to carry suppressive fire into attacks. The human dimension was equally significant. Workers in arsenals, technicians in workshops, and logisticians in supply chains became as vital to the battlefield as the soldiers themselves. Every bolt tightened, every belt fed correctly, and every barrel polished underpinned the firepower that would dominate the front lines. The war extended far beyond trenches. It reached into the factories and railways, where the invisible army of production powered the visible devastation. The machine gun thus became a mirror of industrial modernity. It required precision, discipline, and scale to function at its terrifying potential. Nations that mastered production gained leverage that could determine the outcome of entire campaigns. Those that failed suffered catastrophic consequences, sometimes watching whole armies destroyed not by lack of courage, but by shortages, mismanagement, or faulty machinery. In the end, the machine gun was both a weapon and a symbol, a product of human ingenuity, amplified by industrial might and yet inseparable from the horrors it unleashed. On the battlefield, it dictated tactics and strategy. In factories and arsenals, it dictated labor and organization. And in the minds of commanders and soldiers, it became a constant reminder that modern warfare was no longer fought with bravery alone. It was fought with machines, men, and the unyielding logic of industry. The machine gun was more than metal and mechanics. It was a force that shaped human lives in ways both immediate and lasting. Letters, diaries, and first-hand accounts reveal the scale of its impact, showing how ordinary men confronted extraordinary terror. Private Samuel Henderson, writing from the muddy fields of Ypres, described the first time he saw a machine gun in action. It sounded like the sky itself was falling. Men dropped beside me, screaming, silent or just gone. I crawled for hours, clutching the mud, praying it wouldn't find me. For soldiers like Henderson, the weapon was almost supernatural, an invisible predator that moved faster than thought and struck without warning. Nurses and medics faced another dimension of horror. Clara Barton's wartime diaries, though from earlier conflicts, foreshadowed the scale of suffering in World War I. By the trenches, the cries of wounded men overwhelmed hospitals. Machine gun injuries were particularly brutal. Limbs torn, torsos riddled, lives extinguished in seconds. Medics worked tirelessly, often under fire themselves, yet the sheer volume of casualties made heroism almost meaningless. Some soldiers found fleeting moments of reflection amidst chaos. Lieutenant Karl Weiss of the German Army wrote in his journal, "The gun is merciless, but I feel its power. Each man who falls reminds me of our own vulnerability, our own dependence on this steel to shape victory." Soldiers recognized that survival depended not on luck alone, but on understanding the machine, its patterns, and its limitations. Letters from home reveal the psychological toll. Families read of unceasing barrages, endless trenches, and the vanished friends of their sons. Soldiers carried both fear and guilt, the constant knowledge that death could strike at any moment. Some described a numbing desensitization. The longer the machine guns fired, the less they felt, until fear became background noise, and survival became mechanical as well. Prisoners of war offered another perspective. Many recounted the terror of capture under machine gun fire, the sudden impersonal nature of death, and the eerie calm of a gunner operating his lethal instrument. Captured officers marveled at the tactical efficiency, even as they mourned the staggering human cost. Civilians trapped near front lines learned similar lessons. Their towns became killing grounds, their homes vantage points for relentless fire. Even acts of bravery were reshaped. Soldiers who charged machine gun nests faced almost certain death. Yet stories persist of men storming positions to protect comrades or gain strategic ground. Their courage was extraordinary, but the odds were starkly against them. Survival, when it came, often felt accidental, a mix of timing, terrain, and chance. Through these accounts, a pattern emerges. The machine gun was more than a weapon of war. It was a teacher of fear, endurance, and adaptation. It forced men to reckon with their vulnerability, with the limits of courage, and with the sheer scale of industrialized killing. In mud, blood, and smoke, human lives were caught in the rhythm of mechanical fire, each heartbeat measured against the relentless staccato above. By the end of the war, survivors carried scars, seen and unseen. Some wrote of nightmares filled with the whine of bullets. Others found their worldview altered, haunted by the knowledge that a single invention had multiplied death and suffering on a scale previously unimaginable. The machine gun had not only transformed battles, it had transformed human experience itself, leaving memories, letters, and stories that endure to this day. The machine gun did more than kill. It rewrote the rules of strategy. Armies that once relied on massed infantry assaults were forced into a new calculus. One gun could halt entire divisions, reshape the battlefield, and dictate the flow of war. Commanders learned that planning, timing, and coordination mattered as much as courage or numbers. Defensive positions became dominant. Trenches, barbed wire, and interlocking machine gun nests turned once open fields into killing zones. Offensive campaigns slowed to a crawl, as artillery barrages and creeping advances replaced rapid charges. Battles that might have been decided in days stretched for months, as the weapon's mechanical efficiency transformed attrition into an art form. Victory required more than bravery. It demanded precision, patience, and relentless adaptation. On the Western Front, the consequences were immediate. Entire offensives were stalled or annihilated because generals failed to anticipate the concentration of automatic fire. At the Somme, British troops marched into German machine gun lines, suffering staggering casualties. At Verdun, French forces learned the crushing reality of entrenched guns. Their attacks repelled repeatedly, often before they could even reach the front line. The machine gun turned the concept of maneuver on its head. It favored defense, fortified positions, and calculated attrition over bold, sweeping movements. The industrial and logistical implications were equally profound. Armies had to coordinate supply chains to keep guns operational, deploy trained crews to man them, and integrate their use into broader operational plans. A single neglected gun, jammed or undersupplied, could create a gap in the defense that was exploited with deadly consequences. Conversely, efficient deployment amplified a force's defensive and offensive potential exponentially. The machine gun became a force multiplier, transforming not only battles but the very structure of armies. Tactically, new approaches emerged. Infiltration tactics, combined arms maneuvers, and suppressive fire became essential. Cavalry charges, once decisive, were virtually obsolete. Infantry had to learn to crawl, advance under cover, and coordinate meticulously with artillery and other supporting units. Commanders who failed to internalize these changes lost men, ground, and morale. Those who adapted created new doctrines, teaching future generations how to survive and exploit the weapon's power. Strategically, the machine gun reshaped campaigns and entire wars. Nations recognized that victory was no longer solely a matter of manpower or morale. Industrial capacity, training, and tactical understanding mattered more. Battles of attrition became the norm, and the human cost of misjudgment reached unprecedented levels. Entire strategies had to account for its presence, forcing nations to reconsider not just tactics, but logistics, planning, and even political objectives. The human cost underscored these consequences. Soldiers faced relentless fire, forced to adapt constantly, and entire units were decimated when defensive positions were underestimated. Letters and diaries convey the mix of terror, awe, and exhaustion that defined daily life in front of machine gun nests. Courage alone was insufficient. Adaptation was survival, and survival was an imperfect science dictated by terrain, training, and mechanical fire. In the end, the tactical and strategic consequences of the machine gun extended far beyond the battlefield. It transformed the very nature of war, prioritizing calculation over instinct, coordination over courage, and technology over tradition. Generals learned that their strategies could fail, not because of a lack of effort or bravery, but because a single invention had altered the fundamentals of combat. The machine gun became both a symbol and a tool of industrial might, human ingenuity, and the terrifying efficiency of mechanized war. Its presence demanded a new approach to conflict, one that reshaped armies, strategies, and human lives alike. By the time the guns fell silent, the world had learned a grim lesson. War would never be the same. The machine gun did not vanish with the armistice. Its shadow stretched far beyond the trenches, reshaping not only military doctrine but the way societies understood war itself. Entire generations had witnessed what a single technological leap could do, and the lessons lingered long after the guns fell silent. Nations rebuilt their armies around the reality of automatic fire. Infantry tactics, once rooted in massed formations and cavalry maneuvers, evolved to prioritize coordination, fire discipline, and combined arms operations. Armored vehicles, tanks, and aircraft were developed not just to advance battlefield mobility, but to counter or augment the devastating efficiency of machine guns. Military innovation became inseparable from the lessons carved in mud, blood, and steel during the Great War. The psychological impact endured. Veterans carried memories of the buzzing wall of death, stories that haunted families and influenced literature, film, and art. The machine gun symbolized a new kind of war, impersonal, mechanized, and merciless. It forced societies to confront the human cost of industrialized conflict and the moral weight of inventions that multiplied lethality. Civilians understood that technology could now decide life and death on a massive scale. Its influence also reshaped strategy and geopolitics. Countries with the industrial capacity to produce reliable automatic weapons and train skilled crews gained an enduring advantage. Armies that failed to modernize were quickly exposed, their tactics rendered obsolete by a weapon that demanded adaptation. The machine gun thus became a benchmark of military preparedness, a measure of both national ingenuity and organizational discipline. Innovation continued. Designers sought lighter, more mobile models, giving infantry the ability to carry devastating firepower into attacks. Air-cooled variants, belt-fed systems, and integration into armored vehicles and aircraft expanded the gun's reach and tactical versatility. The weapon that once defined static defense became central to offensive strategy, a paradox that mirrored the evolution of warfare itself. Yet the machine gun's legacy was not only technical, it revealed a deeper truth about human conflict. Innovation can outpace comprehension, and power can become a test of morality, endurance, and adaptation. Armies, societies, and governments had to reconcile the efficiency of destruction with the value of human life. Letters, memoirs, and war histories are filled with the struggle to understand this balance, to find meaning in an age where one invention could redefine existence for millions. Across the 20th century, the machine gun remained a defining tool of modern combat, from colonial conflicts to world wars, from urban insurgencies to global campaigns. Its presence shaped tactics, doctrines, and even the psychology of soldiers entering battle. It was a constant reminder that technology could amplify human capacity to an almost unimaginable degree, and that such power carried consequences far beyond the battlefield. Ultimately, the machine gun transformed warfare from a contest of courage and numbers into a contest of ingenuity, preparation, and adaptation. It forced generals to think differently, soldiers to survive differently, and societies to consider the scale and implications of industrialized violence. It was a weapon of death, yes, but also a mirror reflecting the limits and possibilities of human innovation. And in that reflection lies its lasting legacy, a reminder that the tools we create can redefine our world, that mastery over technology is inseparable from responsibility, and that in every battle, whether fought in trenches, factories, or mines, the lessons of the machine gun endure. The machine gun changed war forever, not because it was a new weapon, but because it forced humanity to confront its consequences. One invention, forged in workshops and tested on battlefields, reshaped strategy, tactics, and the very experience of combat. Courage alone was no longer enough. Numbers alone were no longer decisive. Survival demanded understanding, preparation, and an unflinching recognition of mechanized power. From the deserts of Africa to the trenches of Europe, from the early experiments of Hiram Maxim to the industrial arsenals of the Great War, the machine gun defined a new reality. It was both a tool and a teacher, a force that revealed the limits of tradition and the consequences of innovation. Armies adapted, civilians recoiled, and generations of soldiers learned that death could come not from heroism or chance, but from cold, relentless precision. Its legacy extends far beyond history books. The lessons of the machine gun echo in modern warfare, the importance of technology, logistics, coordination, and adaptation. It reminds us that every tool we create carries the potential to reshape lives, societies, and even civilizations. What began as a mechanical innovation became a mirror reflecting the human capacity for both ingenuity and destruction. And yet, amid the horror, there is a lesson of resilience. Soldiers endured, strategies evolved, and nations rebuilt. The machine gun challenged humanity to rethink the meaning of war, to adapt to unprecedented realities, and to confront the moral weight of innovation. Its story is not just about death. It is about understanding, adaptation, and the relentless pursuit of mastery over the forces we unleash. In the end, the machine gun did more than change battlefields. It changed how we think about war, about technology, and about ourselves. It is a reminder that in every age the tools we create will test our courage, our wisdom, and our humanity. And as long as history remembers its roar, we are forced to reckon with the truth it revealed, that power without understanding is a force as deadly as any weapon.